Immediately out of the gate in this nugget and this skill, I am going to hit you with a major exam talking point for the JNCIA Junos and really most knowledge about Junos in general. That's this. Are you paying attention? The Junos operating system is mostly built on top of the FreeBSD operating system. That is a Unix, or in a lot of ways, a lot like Linux-based environment. Now, there are some newer versions or newer models of Junos that are actually built on top of Linux instead of FreeBSD, but traditionally, Junos has always been built on top of FreeBSD. And the unique thing about that is how it actually operates the Junos operating system and separates all of the individual processes into daemons. What we're going to talk about in this nugget is, what does that really mean, and how does that make Junos different and special? Let's get going. Now it's time to talk about one of my favorite things that it is to talk about, and that is the Junos Juniper operating system and how it's designed a bit differently. So the entire point of Junos is that they make an extremely performant operating system. That's really the thing that they've been doing for decades now, is that they have created an operating system that's very, very performant and very stable. That's another key thing that we're going to be exploring as we progress through this skill. But how have they done it? It all begins with the root architecture of the Junos operating system. Now, here on the screen is kind of a basic diagram of how it actually does what it does. And you see that blue box, Junos software? What we're really talking about here is the operating system itself that runs the Junos software. What we're talking about is FreeBSD. Almost every variant or every deployment of the Junos operating system runs FreeBSD. As you studied through JNCIA exams, in the past, they would have told you things like Junos runs on FreeBSD. It's only a recent phenomenon that they've started developing some variants of Junos that run on top of Linux. But at the end of the day, it is a Unix-like system that is actually running the Juniper operating system, and that is a major talking point that you should keep in mind, that this is where it starts to deviate from other vendors and other platforms that you may be coming from, is that Juniper, at the end of the day, when it boots up, it is booting a Unix-based operating system like FreeBSD or sometimes Linux. In fact, factory defaulted devices, the first time you boot them up, you are brought into the FreeBSD shell, and you have to tell it to enter the Juniper operating system by typing the command CLI to actually get into Junos itself. Otherwise, you have access to the root FreeBSD operating system, and you can treat it no different from any other FreeBSD or Linux-based device that you've ever worked with before. That's how the file structure works. That's how the actual mounting systems work. That's how the operating system recovery works, is it all operates based on FreeBSD or Linux. But then we actually look above the Junos operating system software diagram here, and we actually see some familiar words here. We see things like protocols. We see things like interface management. We see chassis management, SNMP, security services. And these are all operating as their own unique services or processes within the operating system itself. It's no different from your Windows machine. When you open up a new program, it operates its own program in its own dedicated space and RAM, and maybe it runs its own service. That's exactly what's happening here in the Junos software. So in protocols, this is where we're running BGP, OSPF, ISIS. In interface management, this is where we actually perform the configurations on our physical or logical interfaces. In chassis management, this is where it monitors the health of the actual device itself, and maybe we actually have virtual chassis where we actually stack multiple devices together and they behave like one chassis. We'll talk a little bit more about that as we dig into the routing engine and the packet forwarding engine in the upcoming nuggets. SNMP is its own process. So is SSH and NetConf and RESTConf and all of the other management protocols that we know about. Security services are going to be like our firewall or policing services. And then there's a little ... because you kind of get the idea at this point, is that if something goes wrong in one of these processes, which are called daemons, you need to keep that in mind. That's a key word in the Linux term, is these are daemons. When something goes wrong in one of the daemons, it doesn't necessarily take down the other daemons. They're able to keep performing in their own way because they are isolated and separated separated processes. Each of them gets their own dedicated space in RAM and dedicated processor space, and that's why the Junos software is able to leverage the architecture of FreeBSD in Linux to make it such a performant operating system. So this is the first talking point right out of the gate to understand about the Junos operating system and software. First of all, it's mostly built on FreeBSD. That's what you'll probably encounter in the wild, but there are some variants that are built on Linux. And using that Linux-based architecture or Unix-based architecture, we begin to separate each of the processes or things that a networking device like a switch or a router does into their own separated daemons or processes, so that way they have their own dedicated space in RAM and performance implications, and they don't have any errors or problems that could take down another daemon at the same time. That's understand the architecture of the Junos operating system. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.